It's great to be in the SEC. Welcome back to the Recap Rankings episode of the SEC Recap Podcast. I am your host, Ben Warren, coming at you early this morning on Tuesday. Probably won't be out till Tuesday night. Wednesday was on the road traveling all weekend, and I am going to keep this episode shorter. We're going to run through the latest Power Rankings model update, check out what's going on there, and then recap some of those week 2 preview matchups. So that's South Carolina, Kentucky, Arkansas, Oklahoma State, Tennessee, NC State, Texas at Michigan. Just kind of check out what happened there, maybe pop around the conference a little bit. We'll have a week 3 preview episode coming out, hopefully Thursday, Friday. I know it's a little late in the week, but it'll give you a little something going into the weekend. While I got you here, however you're listening, if you're joining us on YouTube, thanks for being here. YouTube drives everything these days. So while you're here, if you're not subscribed, subscribe to the channel, smash that like, smash that thumbs up button, leave a comment. It helps me out tremendously. But however you're listening, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Spotify, glad to have you here. Check us out in video form, though. I'm going to have some graphics up on screen. I always think video just makes everything a little nicer. And before we jump into it, check out all the SEC Pride merch, bonfire.com/store/SEC recap. Got some great stuff up there for every SEC team. All right. Starting at number 16, always at the back, working our way forward. I've got Florida Gators at the 16 spot. Well, really, the model has the Florida Gators at the 16 spot. I might have them a little higher personally, but just running the numbers, the efficiency numbers, that kind of thing. Model still has them in the last spot, so that technically drops them one from the previous week. I think I had them at 15 with a little bit of tweaking there on the model last week. And it's putting them at, excuse me, very early in the morning, putting them at 16 this week. Don't have a lot else to say there. They did play DJ Lagway. DJ Lagway looked great. Actually, we can jump over and just take a quick look at quarterback efficiency rankings. So week 1 to week 2. Let's see if y'all can see this here. I always say this is going to be a short episode, then it never is. So it's listed as Graham Mertz on the chart here. That's just because I didn't insert DJ Lagway's name. Graham Mertz played week 1, obviously for Florida. DJ Lagway played week 2, and you'll see a massive jump here in QBR, basically passer efficiency rating. Graham Mertz a 93.5 in week 1, DJ Lagway 225.61. So naturally, fans love that. That's a huge increase in production from week 1 to week 2. And then, of course, Billy Napier comes out and says, well, we're going to play them both going forward, give them both a chance. So the ultimate cop-out answer there out of Gainesville. I know fans probably want to see more of DJ Lagway. Definitely the more exciting player. But you got to love that. Numbers-wise, I had him. Oh, that's not the right one. Hang on. For week 2, I had DJ Lagway coming in here at the very number 1 spot. So he was my number 1 overall QB in week 1. 18 completions out of 25 attempts, 72%, 456 yards. Incredible. Adjusted yards per attempt, 20.6, which is a massive number. That's the preferred NFL measure because it factors in touchdowns, interceptions. So 3 TDs, no INTs, 225. He is number 1 at on the list this week. So really impressive stuff there. However, the model, factoring all those things in, still has the Gators at 16. And dropping to the 15th spot. No surprise here. We're going to spend a little bit of time on this game for this particular episode, but dropping 3 spots to number 15, the Kentucky Wildcats. It was really, really, really brutal. And this is actually perfect because the quarterback for my number 16 team, DJ Lagway, was my number 1 overall QB, despite the team ranking. Brock Vandegrift, my last overall QB in my week 2 rankings. He had a passing efficiency rating of 55. Based on the way I do it, that's 3 completions on 10 attempts for 30%, for 30 yards and an adjusted yards per attempt of negative 1.5. So he had no touchdowns and 1 interception. So really brutal there. But let's kind of check out the full score. Let me hide my little donate. By the way, if you want to donate, if you're watching here on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, any of those video-based platforms where they give it to you, or YouTube Music, I think does video-based. I've got a little donate to the pod QR code up here. I'm just going to hide that for a minute, but you can find that in the show description. So head on over there, check that out. So you can see that I have them dropping 3. Now, let's check out the box score. I just told you Van de Griff, Dane Key, two receptions for 36 yards. That was it. They had 3 other receivers just catch 1 or 2 balls for 3 yards each, 44 total team yards. On the ground, though, Sumo Karngbaye, I hope I said that right, 17 carries for 70 yards. Justin Patterson, 10 carries, 45 yards. So they were moving the ball on the ground, even as bad as the offensive line looked in the pass pro game. So they had a team total of 139 on the ground. Get this too. Defensively, right? Defensively, 13 tackles for loss, Kentucky defense. So where did it all go wrong? Shane Beamer just owns Mark Stoops, I guess. I mean, I don't know what other answer to give you. Lenora Sellers, he was one of my most improved quarterbacks week over week. He was near the bottom of my week 1 rankings with an 85.5. He jumps all the way to the number 3 spot for South Carolina in my week 2 rankings. 10 completions, 14 attempts, 71%, 166 yards, 11.5 adjusted yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. He clocked in at a 171.33. So just behind Jackson Dart. Actually, not just behind Jackson Dart, a fair amount behind Jackson Dart, but really, really nice week 1 to week 2 improvement there for Lenora Sellers. Saw Robbie Ashford for a few snaps as well. But Rocket Sanders, 13 for 54 and a touchdown on the ground. Only 79 yards rushing for South Carolina. It really was the passing game, which we didn't think those receivers were going to amount to much after week 1 when they struggled against Old Dominion. And it was a weird game. There were a lot of fumbled balls. Neither team, I don't think, lost a fumble. I think they all fumbled and recovered their own, but a lot of balls bouncing around this game. South Carolina was just able to take advantage where I did not think they would take advantage. I'll eat my crow. I really thought South Carolina was outmatched by Kentucky in every offensive and defensive metric in this game. And it was never close. 31-6 there, final score out of Lexington. ESPN College Game Day chooses to go to Columbia, South Carolina, instead of Lexington for Georgia, Kentucky in week 3. So really, really, really brutal weekend overall for Kentucky fans. And I always love listening to the Kentucky Sports Radio guys. I think they do a fantastic job when everything's melting down. And I don't mean that sarcastically. I really, really do mean that. They have such a great, humble and entertaining way of losing their minds when everything is going wrong. So I love the post-game reaction as fans are coming out of the stadium and he's asking them, what's going on. I think Matt Jones does a great job on the post-game call-in show, kind of just keeping a level head and looking at everything very objectively, which is not easy to do when you have a weekend like you did. All right, let's move right along. Number 14 spot, jumping. Now, all last year, I don't think anybody ever took that last spot from the Vanderbilt Commodores. This week, Vanderbilt jumps 2 spots from 16 up to 14. That might be the highest I've had them since I've been doing these rankings. Let me switch my views back over there. There we go. So I'm not going to recap this game. It was Alcorn State. I mean, Vandy murdered them, though. I think Pavia played solid. He wasn't near the top of my rankings. He only completed 10 passes out of 13 attempts, but 76.9% completion rating. Just 83 yards, though. They really got it done on the ground. Adjusted yards per attempt, 6.4. He came in at a 130. And I had several quarterbacks there in the 130s, 140s, kind of from that 5 or 6 spot all the way down through 12. Had a lot of quarterbacks in the SEC that were all really, really close there. performance-wise in week 2. Compared to his week 1 performance, it was a little bit of a drop-off. He was 12 of 16 for 75%, but 190 yards, 2 touchdowns. So I had him at a 175, but Vandy definitely on an upswing. A few other SEC teams appear to be stagnating or on a downswing. That would be Kentucky, Florida. Big week 3 games for both of those teams, whereas Vanderbilt, who does Vanderbilt play in week 3? I don't think it's anybody big. We've got 3 big SEC games, and that's about it. Where are they at? Do they get a bye? Maybe they get a bye. I don't see them on here. Oh, no, Georgia State. Okay. Interesting. It's on the road. They are a 10.5 point favorite, though. So, liking what I'm seeing from the Vanderbilt Commodores, could they compete with South Carolina and Nashville? Could they compete with Kentucky? Could they compete with Florida? A couple of those games that they have. It's looking more and more like every week that Vanderbilt could get to that 6-win mark, go bowling, would be huge for Clark Lee. Would be absolutely huge. So, hat tip there to the Vanderbilt Commodores, jumping 2 spots to number 14. Number 13, staying put. No, it wasn't what Mississippi State fans wanted to see this weekend. I really thought this game could end up maybe somewhat of a shootout, but the Bulldogs will hold steady here at the 13th spot. Don't have much else to say. It was a road game against a better team statistically, so I didn't expect Mississippi State to come out and win this game, but I did think it could be played close, and they actually mounted a decent little comeback there. I think they were down like 30 to 3 or something like that, and then they worked their way back in it late into the game, but just wasn't quite enough. I think that defense obviously problematic. Offense can put up points on some of these defenses, so we'll see what that looks like in SEC play. Number 12, jumping 2 spots, South Carolina. This is a team that I and a lot of other people were really down on coming out of week 1 when they struggled to Old Dominion. Maybe Old Dominion was just better than they thought, or they were really well prepared for South Carolina. But I had South Carolina at number 14. They jump up to number 12. Already talked about that game a little bit, covered Lenore Sellers, covered the team rushing, team receiving, all that kind of stuff. So not going to spend too much time on there, but I think the defensive line, obviously, they caused havoc for Kentucky the entire game. I'm excited to actually dive in and see what the havoc rankings are later this week. Might not cover it on the next episode of the pod because I want to spend the next one kind of previewing the week 3 matchups. But Dylan Stewart along that defensive line, very, very disruptive. They look much improved over last year. Clayton White in that defense caught a lot of flack last season. So I think they've been doing work, really the bright spot. And I didn't see it coming there for the South Carolina Gamecocks. That might be the factor for them that keeps them in some of these games. Sneak peek heading into the LSU matchup next week. I know LSU's ranked in the AP. I don't feel like the AP rankings are worth the toilet paper they're voted on this time of year, at least. So that 18 next to LSU's name doesn't mean much to me. What really means something to me is those offensive and defensive efficiencies, the disruption along the offensive defensive line. I would have LSU right now a half-point favorite on the road. Yeah, I mean, and that might move a little bit, but I think, South Carolina coming off that performance they did, they're going to catch a little bit of favorability, especially with ESPN Game Day coming to town. So if I were handicapping the game right now, even though it is LSU, they're in Columbia, I would have the Gamecocks as a half-point favorite. We'll see what Vegas thinks, and we'll see if that line moves a little bit. What does so ESPN has LSU -7 right now. I think that's a little high right now. I think that's a little high. Like I said, I would have them at maybe a half point or a point favorite. That's more of a toss-up game for me at this point. So go Gamecocks. Dropping a few spots to number 11 is the Auburn Tigers. Now, let me pause right here and go back and kind of cover. This is straight off my website here, SECrecap.com. By the way, where you can find all this stuff. You can find the YouTube videos. You can find my stats. You can find the podcast. all of these graphics. So if you ever get lost and you don't want to dig through on Twitter or X or whatever, just head on over to secrecap.com. I have a little stats page up here at the top. Just click that. It'll take you right here. I update these every week, Sunday or Monday, whenever stat counts are finalized. Let's see, what was I going to look for? Oh, yeah, where my model differs. I talked about this in the preseason power rankings episode. I know this is going to be kind of small. Let me zoom in a little bit here. It's a little better, hopefully. So what I have here is a comparison. This is the most current rankings, right? My power rankings. So you're kind of seeing what's coming next if you're watching here on YouTube. But my model compared to, say, ESPN's FPI, which is used as like a scoring margin handicap metric on, neutral site games, versus my model, which I just have normalized here, like from a 0 to 1. So you can actually see the order of the rankings more linearly. And what I said in the preseason episode was that 1 through 3 or 4, you would see solidify very, very quickly, like after the first couple of weeks, and possibly even 14 through 15, you would see that start to solidify. I think we kind of are. I don't know that Vanderbilt, unless they have a miraculous season, is going to, materialize much higher than 14. Whereas it kind of seems like Florida, Kentucky, Mississippi State, that's going to be your pretty solid 13 through 16, maybe with a little bit of movement. And we saw a little bit of movement 1 through 4 this week as well. It's really that 6 through 12 spot that you're going to continue to see a lot of dynamic movement. And so Auburn, I think I had them at 11 and they jumped to 8 and now they're back to 11. So you're going to see a lot of movement there because these teams are really, really close together in the middle. We're talking about just a few hundredths of a point difference between all of them. So don't be surprised if you're one of those teams in the middle of the rankings this week and you jump up next week and then you fall, 2 or 3 spots next week. You're going to kind of see that throughout most of the season, okay? And you can also see that my rankings don't track the FPI. This is why I like to show this off, guys and gals, is because a lot of podcasts and people on Twitter that do SEC power rankings or Big Ten power rankings, whatever conference, they're just doing it based on their gut feeling. They watch the game, sure, but then they kind of go, well, I really liked how Ole Miss looked this week, so I'm going to put them above, Arkansas, despite, they're not factoring in really like offensive efficiency, defensive efficiency, a lot of these other metrics that I feel like are important if we're going to match teams up on a neutral site. And that's what power rankings are. Power rankings are how would this team fare against this team on a neutral site, right? FPI captures a little bit of that. It doesn't capture all of it. So my model captures some elements of that, of those head-to-head matchups that FPI does not capture. So you can see here like 1 through 5, I'm not going to tell you the teams for those listening because I don't want to spoil the movement at the top of the rankings. And then it starts to differ a little bit here at that 6 through 12, really all the way through the back end there. You see that my model tracks a little, significantly off. These teams go a little bit out of order compared to what the FPI would have them. And that's why I like my model, because it's incorporating some elements of the game that some of these other rankings models, as good as they are, and FPI is great for a lot of things. In fact, most people would make a lot more money betting on sports if they just used FPI, believe it or not. Whatever FPI tells you to do, if you just bet that, you'd probably win 75% of the time. Not financial advice, by the way. But it's a very good model. I just, for power ranking, it doesn't quite capture everything that I feel like it should capture. All right, I've repeated myself enough there. That's why I have Auburn back down at number 11, or really the model has Auburn back down at number 11. Don't have much more to say. They lost to Cal. I didn't get to see that game. We're on the road, headed to Atlanta for the Steelers-Falcons game this weekend, so I was kind of catching everything retroactively, but not what Auburn fans wanted. Still got a long season to go, though. You can still bounce back. At number 10 now, might catch some pushback here, but LSU just continues to have some issues. They let Nicholls State hang around with them a little too late in that game. Defensively, I think they still have problems. That's why I think that game, in Columbia in week 3 for game day is going to be a little bit more of a toss-up maybe than some people are thinking. So LSU has been sitting right around here, no movement from last week at the 10 spot. I think their ceiling is higher. Absolutely. I think LSU's ceiling is way higher than 10, but it just seems like there's still some elements. Maybe it's coaching, maybe it's personnel. They just can't quite figure some things out there. Number 9, also staying put, Arkansas Razorbacks. Let's see, what am I doing here? There we go. Just making that a little bigger on screen for you. Really good game. And I thought, I said on Twitter, this could end up a shootout. I thought it favored Oklahoma State a little bit just because you do have a home field advantage there in Stillwater. But I listened to that game on the radio while we were driving to the ATL. And man, if it was as exciting on TV as it sounded on the radio, I'm sure people were losing their minds. It just felt like the whole last 2 minutes of that game, there was, weird penalties being called, change of possession, going into double overtime, just exciting stuff. I know not the way that Razorbacks fans want it to end. My wife, we like to joke. She has a master's from Arkansas, so she likes to pretend that she's an Arkansas fan, but we're having fun with that in the car on the drive there. You still got to like what you see offensively. Let me give you Taylor Green. So he was right in the middle of my week 2 quarterback rankings. 26 of 45, so a ton of passing, 57.8%, but 416 yards, 8.7 adjusted yards per attempt. That's really, really good. Just had the 1 touchdown, though, and 1 interception, 135.48. A little bit of a drop-off from where I had him in week 1. I had him at a 153.89. He had a couple touchdowns in week 1. So really, really good game there. I don't think you need to worry much if you're Arkansas. That offense is still looking really, really good. They had 232 team yards on the ground rushing. Jaquindon Jackson, 24 carries, 149 yards. Whereas Oklahoma State really was not getting a lot done on the ground. Ollie Gordon, their lead back, their lead back for the day, 17 carries, 49 yards for 1 touchdown. Oklahoma State really had to get it done through the air. So they had 326 team yards compared to Arkansas's 416. Defensive stats, Oklahoma State had 10 tackles for loss. I think that's what ultimately hurt Arkansas in this game. Whereas Arkansas, the defense just had 3 tackles for loss. So I think maybe struggling to get a little bit of penetration there on the line of scrimmage. Offensively, I think Arkansas is going to be just fine. Defensively, how do they hold up through SEC play? I think that's where you'll start to see these margins stretch out a little bit. Dropping a spot to number 8, Oklahoma, the Sooners. I don't have a lot to say about this game. They really let Houston hang around way too long, like 18-16 final score there. Not trending the way you want it to trend if you're Oklahoma. I think they do have a good defense, but you got Tennessee coming to town here in a couple weeks. That's going to be a primetime game. Tennessee played a B- game offensively against NC State and still won 51-0. So Oklahoma, I think you're going to have to show a little bit more to kind of be considered in that top CC power rankings. We'll see if they can do it. Jumping 4 spots. So again, big jump here, back to number 7, Texas A&M Aggies. Believe they took care of business. Let me go find this game here. Sorry, I don't have all of these pulled up, guys, as I'm going through them. Sometimes I just get to one and I feel like pausing. So is McNeese 52-10? I knew it was a big margin there. Not that McNeese was ever going to be a real challenge in that game. And those 10 came on, like basically garbage time points in the fourth quarter. So looked a lot better. Connor Wegman was my other most improved QB week over week. Let me pop back over. There it is. We'll share here. Lenora Sellers and Connor Wegman. I don't know who was technically more improved. I didn't subtract the numbers there. These are not opponent adjusted, by the way. So level of competition doesn't factor in here. It's just looking at their week 1 rating versus their week 2 rating for passing only, guys. No rushing. or yards on the ground are factored in here. That is already captured in team rushing efficiency because the quarterback counts as a runner. So I'm not going to double count a rushing metric. Yes, it is important that a quarterback can affect the game with his legs, but that stat is already accounted for. Whereas no other player on the field can account for passing efficiency unless they're counted as a quarterback or a passer, right? So Connor Wegman, 67.5 in week 1, 154.07. Let me see what his stats were. 11 for 14, 78%, 125 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions in that game. So much improved. That's all you really wanted to see, I think, for A&M. They go on the road to Florida. If I were handicapping, I would have Florida as, I think, yeah, definitely an underdog, even though it is at home. Let's see. 6. Let's see. I probably have A&M as a 5-point favorite on the road in Gainesville. 5. Let's see what ESPN. I'll preview this a lot more in the late week episode, but just kind of want to give you a little idea, little sneak preview. Yeah, so ESPN, just looking at the betting odds on ESPN, they have A&M -4. So a little bit lower than where I'd have them. I think that's fair. Like I said, 4, -4, -5.5, which is what I would have them. We'll probably see that move a little bit. All right, let's keep moving. Number 6, staying put, Mizzou. They did exactly what they needed to do against Buffalo. Defense looks good. Offense moved the ball. Just don't have a lot to cover on the Mizzou Tigers right now. They haven't really played anybody yet. I'm sorry. That's not a slight on Mizzou. A lot of teams haven't played anybody yet. The next team we're going to get to hasn't really played anybody yet. So it's still really difficult to glean when you adjust for level of competition. How is everything going to look? We just don't know. They haven't played a competitor that is really giving them a challenge. So the model's not going to move them up or down. They're kind of doing exactly what they need to do to stay put. Same thing here at the number 5 spot, the Ole Miss Rebels. Now, a lot of people looking at them on film, the eyeball test, say they're a top 3 team in the SEC. I'm not going to argue with that. If you're just going on your gut feeling, I get it. This is my model, though. It is statistically based. The model does not see that. The model factors in some efficiency rankings based on level of opponent. So I still got the Rebels at number 5. They really don't play anybody until, week 4 maybe? Who do they have? No, not even Georgia Southern. So they just don't. We just won't see anything really out of Ole Miss. I do think they are that good potentially. But they got to get some real competition in front of them before we could definitively say that they're one of the best, 2 or 3 teams in the SEC. All right, holding still at number 4. Again, this is a team a lot of people are going to think should probably be higher, especially based on the win that they just had. But the Tennessee Vols, my model doesn't move them at all. However, it is really, really, really close between them and Alabama. Let me pop back over here to my website so you can kind of see my model versus the FPI rankings. I have Tennessee at a 0.8006, just ahead of them. Surprise here, Alabama 0.8162. So not a huge margin there between the 2 teams. Tennessee does get a top 25 win over NC State. NC State did not look like a top 25 team, that's for sure. I said on Twitter before this game that we often don't get to see the real talent disparity until the end of the season between a top 10 team and kind of that fringe or back half of the 25. There's a huge talent gap between your teams in the top 10 and then that 18 to 25. But I think we saw it on display in Charlotte in this game. 51-10, the score there for the Vols. I mean, they led 20-3 going into the half. Again, I said on the pod that if Tennessee leads going into halftime, the game's over. The defense just absolutely wore them down. B- offensive performance. It was not great. 2 picks from Nico. He's young. one he tried to force. The other one, they just had good pressure on defense, kind of caught his arm there, forced the ball into a bad spot. But defensively, though, I mean, Tennessee just absolutely laid the wood, blew the doors off of them, beat the brakes off of them. I don't know any other way you describe it. Grayson McCall, 15 of 22 for 104 yards. Nico, 16 of 23 for 211 and 2 scores. That did have the 2 interceptions. 249 yards on the ground, most of that coming from Dylan Sampson. He had 2 scores, 132 yards. 211 team receiving yards for Tennessee. It was domination. 13 tackles for loss for the Vols. They lived in the backfield. I think NC State had just like 30 or so yards of total offense in the second half. So exactly what you wanted to see if you're Tennessee, man, against a top 25 opponent. Nobody can take that away from you, even if NC State does fall out this week. That was a top 25 matchup at the time it was played, and you beat their brains in. That is a team that looks legit. Could you argue that Tennessee is a top 3 team in the SEC? Absolutely. Could you argue that they should be ahead of the next team in my rankings, Alabama? Absolutely. You have a very, very valid argument. This is what the model thinks thus far. The great news is we still got all of SEC play to figure this stuff out. And so I'm going to enjoy running these numbers with you guys the rest of the season. Let's move on here. Alabama, now they struggled late into the fourth quarter against South Florida. That's Alex Golesh's team, former offensive coordinator at Tennessee. A lot of Vols fans on Vol Twitter, very quick to point that out. But he really gave them all they could handle until Alabama just kind of outlasted them depth-wise and talent-wise. But that was a game going into the fourth quarter. A lot of people saw that thinking Alabama's maybe going to have some struggles. Still not completely sold that Alabama's going to struggle. I just think USF had a really good game plan for them. But there were some concerning things there. I'm not going to go in and rehash that game. The Crimson Tide won it. After the game's over, all that matters is that W in the win column or that L in the L column. So Tide got the win. That's all that matters. Now, dropping a spot at number 2, I think they've held the number 1 spot through virtually the last 2 seasons. My model drops them this week. Number 1. Now, did they do anything wrong? No. But that team that we got sitting at number 1, who we're about to talk about, showed up and showed out in the way that you need to claim that number 1 spot in the power rankings. So the margin is fair here. I got Georgia at a 0.9042 in my model compared to Alabama 0.8162. So the margin there between 2 and 3 is still pretty wide. But a decent margin between the number 2 team and the number 1 team here. By the way, outside of the Clemson game, like Georgia played Tennessee Tech this weekend, right? I think they mercy ruled them going into the second half. It just was, we didn't see a lot from Georgia that we didn't already know. Whereas this next team, your Texas Longhorns, jumping 2 spots to that number 1, beating a top 10 team in Michigan, that's going to earn you points, right? When you look at, power rating metrics, beating a top 10 team like that, yeah, top 10 in the AP, but statistically on paper, Michigan is still a good team. They're still a very good defense. Texas just way more explosive on offense. Final score there, 31-12. It was never really out of hand for the Longhorns too. 17 second quarter points really kind of put the game out of reach. For Michigan, Quinn Ewers, 24-36 for 246, 3 touchdowns. He was let's see where he came in. For week 2, he was actually number 13. I think because of the number of pass attempts and the percentage rating. So 24-36, 66%, 246 yards, adjusted yards per attempt, 8.5. He did have the 3 touchdowns. So he actually came in at a 124.38. I know that feels low, but that's just how we're calculating passing efficiency, right? That's just what the numbers say, guys. Don't shoot the messenger. That's just what the numbers say. But his performance on the field, that's what matters, right? Really, really incredible. 143 team yards rushing for the Longhorns, 246 team yards receiving, 3 touchdowns through the air, 1 on the ground. They held Michigan, that Texas defense held Michigan to just 82 rushing. 3 tackles for loss. Michigan offensive line still pretty good. Michigan just 4 tackles for loss. So that Texas offensive line, the real deal. I really thought it would come down to explosiveness for Texas. They had a long run of 55. That'll do it. They had a long reception of 22, a long of 33, a long of 20, a long of 23, a long of 18. So if you go back and listen to my preview pod, if you're not listening to my preview pods, they come out late in the week, Thursday, Friday, you need to listen to those because I deep dive into some of those advanced team metrics that make the difference. I even tweeted it out with the game graphic that it was going to be the difference in Texas's explosiveness on offense versus what Michigan is allowing defensively for explosiveness. And if you want, guys, if you want that kind of in a more graphical format, head on over to secrecap.com. Let me take you to the homepage. I'll show you exactly how to find it. So it'll land you right on this page. Just kind of has my latest post right here at the top. There's a little button up here in the corner that says stats. You click on that button. And it's a stats page. It is not fancy. But you're going to get to see this nice sort of scatter plot with the team logos. So EPA, expected points added per play, offensive and defensively. Now for offense, you want that to be as positive as possible. For defense, you want that to be as negative as possible. So what you want to look at for your team is in the bottom right quadrant. And this is excluding garbage time. So if your team was just absolutely crushing their opponent, you may not be in that bottom right quadrant because the game was way out of hand by, halftime, which is what we kind of see with Tennessee and South Carolina here, right? But if you look at, your Ole Miss, your Georgia, your Missouri, these are opponent adjusted, by the way. So it normalizes these just a little bit. Texas A&M, non-garbage time, offensive and defensive, overall EPA per play. This gives you a visual of kind of what we're talking about. A little bit of that explosive dynamic nature of the offense and how well your defense limits that. So again, I put this out on Twitter every week as well, but if you want to see it right when it's updated, every Sunday or Monday, just bookmark secrecap.com. You can get it right there. You can see how bad Kentucky was, right? Which is why I like doing these scatters. It visualizes how bad or how good a team was. Kentucky all the way over there to the far left, negative offensive EPA per play, with a positive defensive EPA, meaning your offense is never in good field position and your defense is just giving up way too many points and letting the opposing offense in advantageous field position. If you also want to check out how balanced your team is week to week, you can kind of check out this scatter, just pass yards versus rush yards per attempt. So per play or per attempt or whatever, rush yards per attempt along the bottom there, pass yards per attempt along the Y. And you can sort of see the distribution. Obviously, you want to trend. It doesn't matter really how you want to trend, but the farther right and up you are, obviously that's better because you're averaging more yards per rush and more yards per pass. But what you're also looking for is balance. If we were to draw an imaginary diagonal line all the way corner to corner there, trending up into the right, you want your team to fall kind of along that diagonal line. And so we do have some really balanced offenses right now. Auburn, believe it or not, pretty balanced, though not averaging a high amount of rushing yards per carry. Tennessee, Georgia, Ole Miss, all very, very balanced as well. So that just gives you a little bit of a look into that. Let me go on, kind of recap our final rankings, guys, here. I'll just put it up on the screen for you. That is also on the website as well, and I post that every Sunday once those numbers updated. So I'm going to cut this off here. This still ran long. I don't know how this episode always runs long. I always think I'm going to be able to do it in 15 or 20 minutes, and it just never happens. But there you go, guys. Texas taking the number 1 overall spot this week. Florida dropping to the number 16 spot. Let me know what you think. Drop it in the comments. Do you think your team is too high? Do you think your team is too low? Do you think it's right on the money? Let me know. Follow me on Twitter at SEC Recap. Head on over to the Bonfire store, bonfire.com/store/SEC Recap. Check out all that really great merch, including, that was a demo one there. My favorite, the Big Doink Energy t-shirt. I have one ordered. You're going to see me sporting it here on the podcast, as well as my new Nico I Am a Believer game style jersey t-shirt for you Tennessee fans out there. I've got something for everyone, no matter what SEC team. By the way, if you're Texas or Oklahoma, there's not something for you yet. I misspoke. I have a new collection. The SEC Pride collection is my legacy collection. I have a new collection that I'm going to be rolling out that does include Texas and Oklahoma. So obviously I'll drop that here on the pod. I'm rambling now. Stay tuned for the pre-cap, the preview, week 3 preview episode coming out later this week, Thursday, Friday. I will catch you all on that one. Have a fantastic week. Catch you on